Hi guys, welcome back. EXUK here with another vid. This one is a response to Samoji, I hope I pronounced that right, and to an extent a bit of a discussion I had with Sean Driscoll, or his comment on a video rather, that I saw this morning, with regards to Sandbox versus Railroad games in RPGs. Now, maybe my definition of Sandbox is a little different to everybody else's. I'm not entirely sure, because unlike Railroad, where we know exactly what that is, I've often heard a couple of different views on what a Sandbox game is. But I'm going to put across my point of view here. I'm going to start with Sandbox games. To me, a sandbox game is one where the world exists, whether it's your game world, whether it's a city where they're based or what have you, but the player characters can do whatever the hell they want. Sure, you've got a story running or plot lines running through it, but the characters are not forced into a particular storyline. They do what they want, or you have an area in your game, again maybe it's a city, maybe it's something else, but when the characters arrive, it's open for them to do, whatever their scenario is, it's up to them to do everything, and it's left entirely up to them. An example being is a friend's Dark Heresy game that I'm playing in at the moment. It's a really good game, but his game is very sandboxy. One of the scenarios we had was to investigate the disappearance of one of the inquisitors in the sector, who hadn't been heard from in a couple of months, no reports, but we know that the inquisitor in question had an agent on board this particular rather dodgy criminal element run space station. So we were dispatched to try and find this agent, to find out then what happened to the inquisitor and if possible recover him, which was great. Nice and simple, you think, but upon arriving at the space station we find we've got like 6 or 7 floors of this thing, and there's huge bazaars, and there's bars, and there's clubs, and there's offices, and there's a bounty hunters guild, and there's, it's a thriving environment, but we've got nothing. We just know that he's on the station somewhere, and we spent maybe 2.5 sessions, and these are like 4-hour sessions, just trying to find him, by going from one place to another, because the GM hadn't said, right, we know for if we ever had to contact him that the agent would be at one of 2 locations. No, we just knew he was on the space station, so we spent ages trying to find this guy before we did. Once we got what we needed from him, we were able to go to a certain location, which was the planet the Inquisitor was at, but again, then we've got an entire planet that the guy's at. We've got his base camp, we know 2 possible locations, and there's at least one other that isn't mentioned in the records, and it's left for us to decide where we're going. Again, a lot of people quite like this sort of style of play, because it means that the players can do what they want. Yes, you might have a given task, but you might decide to go and do something else first, sort of thing, or you might decide to spend more time interacting with certain NPCs or what have you, and it's fine for if people like that. Personally, I can't stand that style of play. I much prefer you have a story and you're telling the story, not railroady in the sense that you have no option. You are going from A to B to C to D and so on. But I hate turning up, because I just don't get any enjoyment out of that. My enjoyment comes from either partaking of the story as a player or telling the story as a GM. Now, this is where we come to. I'm going to show you an example of what I think is the perfect middle ground, because obviously you don't want a scenario where it's you must go here and defeat the evil Goblin Lord, and you just go to the dungeon and you defeat the Goblin Lord, and then you find out that he's not really the Goblin Lord, you've got to go somewhere else, and then somewhere else, and then the GM doesn't let you do anything in the meantime. You might turn around and go, well, we've done over one Goblin, let's resupply, or let's do something else till we can get a bit more experience perhaps and come back and tackle the real Goblin Lord. Some GMs won't let you do that in a railroad, and that's what to me a railroad is. It's where it is nothing but the story. You cannot do anything else. However, this isn't a perfect example. Some of you will probably remember this from Dungeon Magazine, or even this particular book put out by Paizo, Shackled City, which was the first sort of real adventure path. I know Wizards put a really basic one, sort of like a Blue Book module series out with the release of 3rd edition. But I don't really class that because they're more standalone with a slight background to it. But they did this, and then they went on and they did a sequel called Age of Worms. Well, I say it's a sequel. It's more in common with this than what the 3rd one did. They then did one called, I think it was called Blood Dim Tides or something like that. And it's a shame that the others weren't put into books as well. And this is, I just double check how many scenarios. Well, you've got a full campaign in here from 1st through to like 20. There's 12 sections to it, and I will admit this is a to B to C to D. However, because I'll do a small spoiler, because this book's old enough now that you've either played it, or it's been out there and people know the story anyway. But it starts off with the characters in the city of Cauldron, leaving the tavern or wherever they have been for the night. They encounter a priest being attacked by some thugs, rescue him, because it's going to be a very short campaign if the players don't get involved straight off the bat. I find out that he's been tasked with investigating some disappearances, and tries to get the characters involved. And from there, there's a number of plot lines, or locations rather, that they can get to, and it links. But ultimately, it does follow one chapter after the other. However, there's room for the players to do what they want to do. If they want to, maybe there's a downtime after a scenario, and the next one kind of starts almost self-contained, I suppose, as opposed to being a link straight onto the other. Then you can fit in a scenario. If the players want to go do something else for a bit, you can do that. I mean, I did it when I ran this. They wanted to go to the next city along and do some investigating there, which they thought might be relevant. So I wrote a scenario for it. A railroad GM wouldn't do that. They'd go, you can't. This is all there is. But this is what I like. I like having the story. I like being given the story, and then as a character, as a player character, to follow that story. Whenever I roleplay, I want to tell a story. When I GM, I want to give the characters a story. I'm not going to say railroad them, but I've got a story that I have purchased, or I've written, or I've come up with, or whatever. And that's what you do. Because my opinion is, if you're going to turn up as a player to a gaming session, and then you're not going to do what the scenario is that the GM has brought to the table, why are you even at the table? I mean, you're wasting everybody's time and your own, because whatever your play style as a GM, you put time, effort, blood, money, tears, you put a lot into the preparation and running of your game. And if players aren't going to actually tell the story that you've prepared, what's the point? Now, to be fair, if you're going to do something really odd, like your players are used to you running Forgotten Realms or Greyhawk or whatever, standard sort of like D&D fare, and suddenly you turn around and go, right, this campaign we're going to do involves Spelljammer. We're going to be spaceships, flying boats in space, fighting off the orc hordes, invading one world after another. Your players might turn around and go, actually, Bob, that's not what we fancy. Can we just do something different? So if you're going to do something really odd and strange, then fine. If you're going to do something slightly different, like you want to do an entirely nautical game, then you should mention it in advance, because that way characters don't suddenly find out that they're going to be crew on a boat and none of them have got to swim. But yeah, I've lost my train of thought there. But yeah, that's how I like my games. I like them to be an A to B to C, but with room for the players to want to do something different, and for the GM to be able to wing it or expand it. You're not stuck with just what you're given. But I cannot stand for the life of me what I call the sandbox game, where the world is there, you guys do it. You know, I've written scenes for what will happen if you go to such and such a bar, or you go to the docks, or you encounter such and such. You know, that the only game I've ever found where that is a necessary evil is probably either of the two vampire games from White Wolf, because that's the sort of game that does lend itself really well to that format. But I think I've never found any other game to do that. Whether you're talking D&D and Pathfinder, Call of Cthulhu, you know, a superhero game, or you know, a zombie horror game, whatever you go, I just don't find that they work as a sandbox. And now, to be fair, to wrap this up, because it's stretching on for like 11 minutes now, which is a little longer than I intended. If someone came to me and said, "Hi, I want to get into, you know, I'm just getting into D&D or whatever, what play style would you recommend?" I would say this one. I wouldn't say sandbox at all, because I don't think it's a good one for players. You know, it's probably good for someone like Ander and his group because they want the immersive roleplay. But I think the majority of people would prefer having a story and telling that story. Because I say, if you're not there to tell the story that's been put before you, that's been brought there by the GM, you're wasting your time, the GM's time, and everybody else's at the table's time. Anyway, that's just my thoughts on those and what I prefer and what I would espouse as the better of the two. I actually, as I wrap this up, I would probably say that I'm somewhere, I would put myself slightly right of centre, closer towards railroady without actually being railroady, but I think you've probably gathered that. Anyway, that's my thoughts. I look forward to hearing what anybody else has to say and their thoughts on it. And so until then, take care and good gaming.